Hey guys, welcome back. So, if you spent any time in fantasy communities, you've probably heard of this book, The Library at Mount Char, and you've probably heard that it's just really weird and strange, and you might be wondering if it's for you. Well, keep watching. I'm going to give you my thoughts, and then at the end, I'm going to talk about who I think would enjoy this book. How do I even summarize this book? What genre is this? Is this urban fantasy? Is this weird lit? Yes. So, in all seriousness, this book is about a group of orphans who are adopted by this man that they just call father. And calling him a man is a pretty big understatement. In this world, he's basically a god. And so, in the thousands of years that he's been alive as God, he's compiled all of his knowledge of the universe into this library that exists in like a plane of reality that's separate from our own. And so he brings all the orphans to live in this library and to raise them as librarians. And so basically all of this knowledge that he's gathered, he's divided it up into 12 catalogs, and he assigns one orphan to each, or one librarian to each catalog. And so the father goes missing, and there's this magic barrier that's surrounding the library, and it's preventing any of the librarians from being able to get back into their home, to the library. And because the library contains basically all of the knowledge of the universe, whoever controls the library is essentially God. And with Father gone, missing, that means that the title of God is up for grabs. And so you can imagine that other than the librarians, there are a bunch of other forces in the world who are looking to get into this library. And let me tell you, it is absolutely bonkers insane. We follow three POV characters throughout this book. So one of the librarians, Carolyn, is the one who studied the language catalog. And so what this means is that she's fluent in all human languages, as well as in some non-human languages as well. So an interesting one, for example, is the language of storms. And Carolyn is who we spend the most time with. And as the story progresses, we start to see that she has a lot of plans of her own that aren't necessarily aligned with those of the other librarians. And I really enjoyed reading about Carolyn. I really liked her POV. I thought she was incredibly strong and smart and resourceful because, having studied language, that's not necessarily the most powerful of the catalogs, but she makes do with what she has. And it's really fascinating to read about her. I also think that she does a lot of bad, I guess, in this book. Like, she does a lot of things to a lot of people that could be seen as pretty bad, but her overall goals are still for the good of humanity and for good. And it's just the way that she achieves those goals that maybe aren't so good. And I feel like she's very if you've played D&D, I feel like she is the definition of chaotic evil. No. I feel like she is the definition of chaotic good. So our next POV character is Steve, who is just this poor, innocent man who got roped into Carolyn's plans way in over his head. And Steve is just a blast to read about because he offers us the only sane perspective on librarians, being that he didn't grow up in the library, he's just a regular American man. And since the librarians grew up in a library, which, as I said, exists on a plane outside of our own, they didn't really have much social interaction except with each other, and they had to spend a lot of their time dedicated to their studies. So they don't have the best social skills, I should say. And Carolyn is really the only one of them who has like some sort of like human social skills, just because she studied language, and so she had to study among humans, to learn the language. But even she's still like pretty nutty. So our final POV is this man, Erwin, who is this ex-military commander turned elementary art school teacher turned Homeland Security investigator kind of guy. And I think he's hilarious to read just because he is so like, fists first, ask questions later. And he's another one who isn't a librarian, so his interactions with them are very, very comical, especially when read from his POV. But where this book really shined for me was in the world building and in the atmosphere. So I was just so intrigued by the concept of this library outside of our own plane that contains all of the knowledge of I was going to say humanity, but even more than humanity. And the 12 catalogs were just so interesting. So there was the one catalog that the librarian who was studying it, the death catalog, she would literally die, and then for weeks at a time she would be dead, and she was doing her learning among the land of the dead. And there was the animal catalog where the librarian who studied that one was going to live out among animals, like in the forest and in the ocean. And he was meeting like all these gods and stuff. And it was just so cool. And I really, really wanted to know more about that. I wanted more of like the backstory and the lore and like the creation of the library. It was wonderful. I loved it. I thought that this whole like library that was crafted and the idea of it was so unique and so creative, and also just so fascinating to read about and to learn about. So I also mentioned atmosphere, and I just want to say that this book is dark. It is very, very dark. There is a lot of like gore and violence, and it's all so like over the top. But the way that it's presented is in such a way that it's not horrifying or scary. And I think that in any other book, the stuff that's happening would honestly probably be able to count as horror. But just the way that this is written, it's so like, it's almost comical. So I'm going to give you an example. We have the librarian who studied the catalog of war. He's basically this like superhuman. Um, and so, there's a scene where he comes like just busting through a place, and he's just like leaving pure carnage behind him. There's described as just like limbs everywhere and blood and body parts, and he's just smashing his way through with this like pyramid he's got on the end of a chain, like throwing it at people, and like their heads are exploding. But he's doing this all wearing a tutu because he's a librarian and doesn't know anything about clothes that humans wear. And so he just dug the tutu out of the closet of the person that the librarians are staying with. And so now you just have this image of this massive man just like leaving behind a trail of just violence, doing so wearing nothing but a pink tutu. It's so over the top and so crazy and just and so gory, but in such a way that's honestly, I don't even know if funny is the right word. It's so bizarre. It took me a while to think of that. It's bizarre, but in the best way possible. I recommend this book for that alone. Just to read about like this horrifying stuff happening, just to like juxtaposed with like just the most bizarre stuff. So in terms of the actual story and the plot itself, I found that this was very fast paced. It's not an especially long book, but even so, like it went really fast, and there were a lot of like twists and turns along the way, and just a lot of things that were happening that I was like, I cannot put this down. I need to know what's going to happen next. Like, one of those sacrifice sleep, even though you got to be up in the morning because you're just so like, what's happening? What's the next thing? So this book really did well in that. And for a book that isn't that long and does have so much content and so much going on, I was really pleasantly surprised at how the ending was so well pulled off. I thought the ending was bittersweet. I think it was beautiful and sad, and it made sense for everything that happened. And it took me by surprise because I really didn't think that the author was going to be able to pull it off as I was getting up to the ending. But he did. He did a fantastic job. And the only thing that I could complain about is that I really wish we just got to see Carolyn use more of her catalog in a more creative way. So as I mentioned, she's very clever. And she had to be because her powers aren't that strong compared to all these forces in the universe that are against her. But that being said, sorry, my headset just shut off in the middle of recording, and that's what I use as my mic. So anyways, sorry. So she's very clever, but she's clever in such a way that doesn't involve the use of her language. Like, it's more just like, thinking of like creative solutions and stuff. But I just wish that we had got to see her utilize such I guess weak power in a way that would have been beneficial to her, and just to find more creative ways to use her power. Other than that, though, I loved it. I loved her as a character, and I still thought that she was very smart and resourceful. That's really the only thing I wish. And there is just one thing that I wanted to touch on as well, which is the concept of a heart coal that this book brought up. And essentially, is a heart coal is, it's kind of described as a sickness, but it's basically when you maybe have a loss in your life, maybe not necessarily a death, but a loss of someone important to you, and you're yearning after that person, or that whatever it is, but you also kind of build this idea up in your head of like the person that they would be now, and that that person that they really are will never compare to what you've built up in your head. And so the heart coal is basically this yearning for a person that doesn't exist, basically. And that really resonated with me. I'm sure it might resonate with a lot of other people too. So before I get into who I would recommend this book to, I did just want to give a quick trigger warning about the type of content in this book, because as I said, it is very dark. There is a lot of violence. So that's something to be aware of. But there is also mention of off-screen sexual assault. It's only once in the book, but it does happen. So that's just something to be aware of if that's something that you just want to completely avoid in what you're reading. And there was also, because the father is so cruel, there is a lot of violence against children that we are seeing in this book, as when we kind of see the backstory a little bit of Carolyn growing up in the library as a child and how she's treated as a learning librarian. And so that's another thing just to be aware of before you go into this. Anyways, so who do I think should read this book? Well, I think if you're a fan of absurd humor and just over-the-top violence, an intriguing world and concept, then I would definitely add this book to your list. I thought it was fantastic. I gave it 5 stars, but I understand if that might not be your thing. If you're the type to steer away from violence and descriptions of gore, and you also don't really like that juxtaposition, I guess, of tone and actions that are happening, then I would probably skip this one. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, consider subscribing to my channel, give me a like, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Until next time, bye.